Across a covered bridge one sees a small village huddled between the stream and the vertical slope of Round Mountain, and wonders at the cluster of rotting gambrel roofs, bespeaking an earlier architectural period than that of the neighboring region. It is not reassuring to see on a closer glance that most of the houses are deserted and falling to ruin. It is hard to prevent the impression of a faint, malign odor about the village street, as of the massive mold and decay of centuries. Hell yes. Hell yes, I love this game. It's not finished yet, and I still love it. It's got its quirks, but what is a babe without an errant hair? A statue without the marks of a chisel? Anyway, I want to talk about this game because I have a lot to say about it. This isn't a yap session, I have an actual script. There's no target audience, both prayers and prospects are welcome. I'll also be avoiding spoilers to an extent, so no worries on that front. Without further ado, I want to start by picking apart some core elements of Witchfire. Firstly, dark fantasy is the label they've chosen to run with, but I think gothic is way more interesting and descriptive. I say this because of the very obvious Pulp Van Helsing and Solomon Kane influences, but also the biblical and occult themes and the Victorian era setting. When I think dark fantasy, I tend to think medieval, like The Witcher or Game of Thrones. Not to say that all Victorian era fantasy is automatically gothic, but come on. Come on. Bloodborne seems to have been a big inspiration, and that game is about as gothic as you can get. The game takes place somewhere around the 19th century, but your surroundings feel much older, because they are. You're visiting places that have been untouched for centuries, relics of a bygone era. Mostly rural too, which adds to that. It's a really cool detail of the setting. You're uncovering history and challenging the witch with a new and improved arsenal. There are also some references to Slavic folklore and more broadly European myth surrounding witches and herbology. The prayers also somewhat resemble witchers in background. They're both abominations made to fight the supernatural, feared and reviled by those around them, and sporting a prominent physical mutation that makes them instantly recognizable as not entirely human. Unlike the witchers, the prayers keep theirs hidden behind a mask. Cool detail, I think, adds to the mystery. Obviously, religious themes are present as well, but they intermingle with and are sometimes overshadowed by more occult themes. There's a reason why you're not collecting souls but Witchfire. Faith and magic clash, but also mixed together. Gameplay-wise, Witchfire draws from a lot of different levels. Perhaps most infamously, it incorporates some extraction shooter mechanics, which is actually what drew me into it in the first place. I had played Prey Mooncrash sometime prior, and I was looking for something with a similar gameplay loop. It also takes heavy inspiration from Souls-likes in many ways, including how you engage enemies. It's a lot more meticulous than something like Borderlands or Destiny. Exchanging hits is a bad idea. If you're getting hit, you're doing something wrong. Enemies also aren't idiots that you can kite around. They'll flank you and surround you if you let them. Destiny is another influence though, but beyond the basic movement and gunplay, combat feels way different. The RPG elements are also very Souls-like, in that you can spec into a certain playstyle by investing in stats and equipment that fit your prayer. There's really only two vestigial roguelite elements here, beyond the obvious stuff covered by the combined Venn diagram of Souls-like and extraction shooter. One of those is Arcana, power-ups granted for the duration of a single expedition, the good old pick between three options. The other is how encounters are laid out on the map and cleared. The maps are open and you're free to do whatever you want in whatever order you want, but the enemies loiter around specific spots that you can clear. There's nothing overtly roguelike about this, but it has the same scent, especially when you look at the map. Before early access, they apparently had a more arenas connected by gates type design going on, and this system is a clever evolution of that. So, Witchfire is a gothic fantasy themed single-player first-person shooter with extraction shooter, RPG, and Souls-like elements. It's a mouthful, but I think it describes the game pretty well. The developers prefer not to use those labels, but I personally find them valuable. That's how I found the game after all. With that out of the way, let's talk story and setting. Your fate is that of a prayer. a sinner seeking penance, willingly turned into a witch-hunting abomination by the Catholic Church. You're immortal and capable of using witchfire to conjure foul magics like the witches. The witches and the Vatican are at war, and you're part of their crusade. The Church has recently discovered the remains of warships from a centuries-old flotilla of theirs around Witch Mountain. One of the ships was carrying an important relic, and you're tasked with finding and recovering it. Weakened by your long journey, you climb down to your new base of operations, the Hermitorium, with hope of succeeding where 7 other prayers failed centuries before you. Reclaim the relic, kill the witch, and conquer Witch Mountain. In this endeavor, you're mainly supported by 2 forces, a mirror to the Vatican workshop, where witches that have betrayed their own kind are working under the overseer to create new equipment for your arsenal. And secondly, a holy flame of the Vestals, which allows you to summon your predecessors to aid you in a time of need. Side note, the Vestals were a real-life priesthood tasked with guarding an actual flame. There's a lot of stuff like that in the game where you'd expect it's something they just came up with, but it turns out to be real history or partially inspired by it. Next someone's gonna tell me that the witch hunts were a real thing. Imagine that. Ascensions, the game's version of a leveling system, happens at an altar, but curiously uses witchfire, which is more so associated with blasphemous magic than faith. There's also a stat called metanoia, which refers to something like repentance, that has an effect on witchfire yield during expeditions. I'm saying this so you understand that the game doesn't make a very clear distinction between aspects of faith and those of the occult. You, a prayer, are an amalgamation of both. There's also the Gnosis Tome, which is a mysterious source of knowledge that when studied increases your awareness of the esoteric and the magical around you. Gameplay-wise, increasing your Gnosis level reveals secrets, allows leyline travel to previously blocked areas, and increases witchfire yield, but it also makes the witch more cautious and causes her to up the ante with her traps and minions. The Gnosis system separates your leveling, which is done via Ascension, from the difficulty scaling, which happens via Gnosis. At one point the 2 systems were one, but now you're able to level in peace without worrying about enemies scaling with you. Thank God. That's one part I hated about Skyrim. It's a great design on paper, but it's a potent cognito hazard when the player notices it. It makes leveling up feel almost repulsive. There are also prophecies, which come from pitiful madmen in the would-be asylum called the Wailing Tower, which allow you to direct otherwise random arcana, and rosaries, which you can find scattered about the environment and can grant powerful effects to those who have specialized in certain stats during Ascension. You can traverse to locations of interest where the witch's influence is thick by using ley lines, functionally portals, which require a navigation chart to safely traverse. A really cool detail is that you can see all the locations you can travel to from the Hermitorium, since they're all on the opposite coast. I love stuff like this. A collector also shows up at one point. They seem to be able to utilize ley lines to travel, and they have an odd look about them. Not sure what their deal is, but it's fun to have at least one creature hanging around the Hermitorium that's not a ghost. Each of the places you travel also has its own story to tell, though you'll have to piece it together yourself. There are virtually no vocal NPCs, very few notes, carvings, or anything written. I'm all for subtle storytelling, but I personally have a really hard time figuring stuff out when there's so little to grab onto. One of the ships of the Order's flotilla crashed onto the island of the damned, with most of the crew perishing at the shore, but the sadists made it all the way into the Wailing Tower and met their end there instead. The guard statues in front of the tower bear the insignia of the Order, so what exactly is this place? One of the warships crashed on the Scarlet Coast, but is this the same crew that made it to Irongate Castle in Velamorn, or did they all perish at the Rift? I have my fingers crossed for more notes left by the other prayers. As it stands, all we know about those guys, and there's 3 of them currently, is the descriptions when you hover over their icons in the map, as well as the locations of their mask shards. Thankfully, the narrative elements are a part of the game that the developers have repeatedly mentioned as something they'll keep working on closer to release. Your enemies are the witch's minions, her victims enslaved and endlessly mirrored by her witchcraft. This was figured out by the prayer Elias, whose mask shards you can find scattered on the Scarlet Coast, tracing the early footsteps of the witch. They're mostly humanoid, but there's a couple monstrosities mutated beyond recognition as well, like the devotees or the woodsmen. To my knowledge, the only strictly non-human enemies to date are the spiders in Velmorn and the sentinels. There are virtually no animals in this game, which is a little curious. You see birds sometimes, and very rarely rats. That's pretty much it for the basic setting, and I think they've got something very special here. The world feels thematically consistent in spite of its many influences and intermarriage of time periods. The fate of the flotilla, the origins of the Wailing Tower, the journey of the witch, and that of the individual prayers all have me intrigued. This is Gothic fantasy done right. Next, I want to discuss the atmosphere, the vibe, the visual language of the game. What a beauty. This game has some of the strongest art direction I've seen in something of this scale. I've previously expressed my distaste for the sort of set dressing that Unreal Engine games seem to utilize, but Witchfire is different. Also performs way better, but that's beside the point. Instead of pointlessly detailed clutter piled to the ceiling, the artists instead paint scenes, places that feel real and natural even when thematically unnatural. They apparently referenced actual paintings from the 19th century, specifically landscapes from the Hudson River School movement, and it shows. Each of the maps has a distinct style. My personal favorite is the Scarlet Coast, which has three elements brilliantly contrasting each other. The pagan idols of the Wiesen, watching over the arrival of the Order's shiny and oppressive military, and the origins of a madwoman seduced by the allure of witchcraft. The enemies also look awesome and visually distinct, and they animate in ways that make them instantly recognizable from a distance. They're also consistent with their respective environments, past inhabitants or would-be conquerors turned mindless horde. When you shoot at an enemy, you feel the kick of your gun, and you hear the bullets either pierce flesh or rattle against armor. The feedback and responsiveness is stellar. Hues of red and orange in the environment guide the player, and yet don't feel out of place in this world of witchcraft. A somewhat desolate world, it turns out. There's basically nothing living anywhere aside from the odd bird or rat that quickly scurries away. Enemies are just conjurations of the witch that disappear into red wisps when killed. This isn't like the world of Fallout or Roadside Picnic. No life has survived or taken over. This is often to the game's benefit atmosphere-wise, but it can feel a little lonely sometimes. Those written notes and carvings by past inhabitants would do a lot, I think, as well as some insects crawling or bullfrogs hopping around. On that note, I'm really looking forward to that upcoming marsh map. Wetlands already present a compelling union between life and decay, so it might yet be the liveliest place we've seen so far. I also hope we might get an enemy that utilizes the environment a little more, like the stalkers from Hexen, Naga-like creatures that strike from the shallows. As it stands, when you're not in the middle of the throes of combat, the game is hauntingly still, like a sidewalk at 4 in the morning. Even at the Hermitorium, you see no sign of your compatriots through the opaque mirror to the Vatican, no sound of gears or anvils when you approach it. Your study of Gnosis also doesn't allow you to befriend any eyes or tentacles of creatures beyond. Hanging out with my homies around the Vestal Flame heals me though. I think Elias has recently been eyeing me strangely. I told him I was gonna invest into the faith stat later, but I think he's starting to question my commitment. So we've talked about influences, we've discussed story and atmosphere. Did I skip something? Feels like there's still something we should talk about. Can't quite put my finger on it though. Yeah, it's combat. I was gonna do a cool montage here, but I don't want to spoil any bosses, vaults, or anything on Witch Mountain. Shit gets even crazier, if you can believe it. The combat feels incredible, once it clicks. The basic moveset is simple but satisfying. You can sprint, double jump, dash, and slide. Your avatar is incredibly mobile, with one caveat that I'll get back to in a bit. Even then, most enemies won't let you run circles around them. Some will teleport around or leap at you, others will keep their distance and snipe you. Some will attack from behind a shield or limit your movement with area denial attacks. Every encounter is a puzzle of sorts, but there are both smart and dumb solutions. You can bide your time, dodge every attack, and use some convoluted combination of spells and arcana to optimize damage for one clean hit. Or you could risk it all and just pepper them with the cricket until they croak. There's not an unfair enemy in this game, but it doesn't mean you can't beat them unfairly. A lot of the more jagged mechanics are in service of this dance-like combat. Stamina is your most important resource and your one lifeline. You're quicker than most enemies, but only when dashing or jumping. Run out of stamina and dodging some attacks becomes impossible. Damage from enemies also reduces your stamina, so play sloppy and you'll quickly be overwhelmed. Weapons have steep damage falloff outside their optimal range, which means most weapons won't allow you to play timid unless they're designed to. Aiming down sights increases your range, but it also slows you down and narrows your vision. Your arsenal is limited to only 2 primary weapons, which means you can't be effective at every range. In addition to reducing your stamina, taking damage also makes you unable to see enemy soul sigils, an otherwise easy way to stun foes. Take too many hits and you might trigger a calamity, a random event with great danger and commensurate reward. Sources of healing are also few. All this combined makes it so you must manage your stamina and positioning effectively, and most importantly, to know your enemy and evade them. You can make each aspect easier by tuning your arsenal and stats. More elixirs and more health, more stamina and vigor, and weapons and spells that work from your preferred range. The game is at its best when you're overwhelmed though. When you're out of elixirs, stamina bar flashing white as you're running toward the exit. When you fail to dodge a boss's attack and trigger a simultaneous calamity, your whole screen filled with enemies and summoned prayers to the point where no foothold is safe. Death isn't realistically very punishing, but it feels crushing, because you know you messed up. On the other hand, clearing an encounter feels super rewarding. Aside from the hunters that sometimes come out of the itinerant portal in small squads, that section of the map is now conquered and safe to explore. Unlike most extraction shooters, you're not on your toes the entire time, which I can appreciate. Exploration is also fun, not only because of the beautiful environments, but also some limited collectibles and rosary beads. I imagine more of these will be added later, but it's never a bad idea to check the top of a tower in the distance, or between some rocks on the shore. The maps aren't just set dressing either, they also serve to spice up combat. Verticality, cover and sightlines, hazards and traps and obstacles that limit your movement and test your awareness. Things start off easy on the relatively flat and open island of the Damned, but get progressively more dynamic. Elements and stuns form another key tactical layer of the game. Fire, lightning, ice, and decay each have their own effects and interactions. There are few ways to trigger stuns, and a stunned enemy is immobile and takes massively increased damage. A stunned enemy on fire takes even more. Weapons, relics, rings, and spells can all trigger different elemental effects, and coming up with your own combination is part of the fun. You should have noticed this by now, but enemies telegraph their attacks quite well. What you might not have noticed, on account of me disabling the heads-up display, is that you get warned about enemies attacking from behind as well. There's a sound cue, but also a visual aid on the HUD. It's a spidey sense of sorts, and it feels incredible to dodge an attack that you can't technically even see. I think the game also adjusts enemy behavior while they're off screen, but let's not ruin the magic. All weapons are equally viable, at least ideally, from the very start of the game until the very end. No weapon is a direct upgrade of another, though weapons themselves can be upgraded in the sense that you can reveal more of their unique powers. Notably, not every weapon is a jack of all trades, and you should experiment with another if your playstyle starts to struggle with new enemies or enemy density. that Dr. Seuss rhyme was not intentional. I'm sorry. So, weapon stats don't scale, but neither do enemies. There are elite variants, but enemy health never scales otherwise. Again, a reminder that this isn't Borderlands or Destiny. You can beat this game without ever increasing your stats and using only your starting loadout. I can't do that, but you technically could. While the enemies can't scale vertically, you definitely can, to the point where eating a couple hits isn't a problem. Zooming out, the gameplay loop is simple. You go on expeditions to complete objectives, find map charts, and collect as many spoils as you can before escaping. Then you run around the Hermitorium, upgrading your stats and gear, and then run it back. And I love every minute of it. Alright, I've said my piece. Hopefully you're as excited about this game as I am. Finally, I just want to give some suggestions to the developers. The game is still in early access, so I think now's a prime opportunity for me to do this. Who knows, maybe some of this stuff is already on a list somewhere in Poland. Firstly, death feels a little too forgiving in contrast to everything else, and it somewhat cheapens the extraction aspects of the game. I'm aware of that Bill Hader quote, but I do have an example. In Hollow Knight, when you die, you respawn with a limited mana pool, which makes your recovery mission not quite a naked run, but a nudge in that direction. It also spawns the Shade, an enemy that effectively guards your remains. Secondly, the onboarding needs to be way more intrusive and exhaustive. I didn't know about soul sigils until 5 hours into the game when I read about them on Reddit. It's in the handbook, but so is literally everything else, so I read and while memorizing everything else, forgot. I've also seen some new players grow frustrated with the stamina bar on the first map, because with the sparse enemy count and long distances, it can seem like an old school sprint limiter rather than a core mechanic. Thirdly, where does the wheat come from for the mills on the coastline? There is no flat land on the Scarlet Coast, and yet there are wagons full of crop. Does it come by ship in exchange for what's mined at the quarry? I need answers. Anyway, it's been a while since I fell in love with a game like this. Not just with its gameplay, but its very essence. And it's not even done yet. With that, I bid you farewell, and good hunting. Thank you for watching. Dude, it took me so long. I can't do these voiceovers, man. Bro, because when you write shit down, you don't write it like how you speak. So there's a disconnect. Once you start narrating it, it starts sounding so strange. And you trip over your words and it sucks. And then you knock over your mic a couple of times and you ruin everything. And when you restart your computer, it thinks, oh, let me use the fucking mic on your webcam instead. That's gonna sound good. Holy shit. I'm glad I got this done though. I'm glad I got it done. And thank you for watching. Thank you.